Welcome to Omni Tales, where every tale, every genre is in one place. Let's dive into another episode of Urban Legends, the Mahaha, which is an Inuit legend. However, this version is going to have a twist, a chilling, terrifying twist. Shh, gather close, story seekers. It's time for another tale. The girl awoke to the kind of silence that did not belong to the living. Snow drifted like pale ash through the still air, and the fire that had kept them warm through the night had died to nothing but glowing embers, hissing faintly under a thin veil of frost. Her breath rose in quick, shallow puffs as her eyes adjusted to the dull light of dawn. And then she saw them, her people, her kin, lying still and crimson stained against the endless white. Her mother's hand was stretched toward her, as though reaching for her even in death. Her father, strong and steadfast, even in his final breath, had fallen shielding her younger brother's body. The girl's throat tightened. She did not scream. She swallowed it down, just as her father had taught her. Survive first, grieve later. Her chest tightened as rough voices and the crunch of boots on snow broke the silence. The explorers, foreign, pale-skinned men in heavy coats, laughed as they picked through what was left of her people. They tore through sealskin packs, took blades carved from the ivory of walrus tusks, and one held up the weathered drum of her great-great-grandfather, whose rhythms had carried their ancestors through long winters. The girl's body went rigid, rage and terror clashing in her veins. And then one of them spotted her. A barked shout rang out. The others turned, their hungry eyes gleaming as though she were already theirs. She stumbled backward, snow clinging to her boots, and her lips whispered the phrase her father had pressed into her soul every night by the fire. When shadows follow you, child, call to the land itself. It will answer. The words tumbled from her lips in the old tongue, shaking, carried on her frozen breath. And then she ran. The tundra stretched before her, endless and merciless. The wind cut her skin raw, but to her it was beautiful still. Great rolling plains of ice that shimmered like silver glass under the waning sun. Each step sent shards of frost flying, each ragged breath a cloud that vanished into the blinding horizon. She ran with everything her 10-year-old body could give, legs burning, lungs tearing. She thought of reaching the next Inuit camp her father had told her about, people who would take her in, people who would keep her safe. Behind her, the explorers shouted and cursed, their heavy boots clumsy in the drifts. Closer, closer, and then laughter. Not the laughter of men. It was high, thin, and merciless. It slithered across the ice, a sound that froze her heart more than the cold ever could. From the snowdrifts they came, long-limbed and blue-gray skinned, their bodies lean as if carved from frozen bone. Their eyes were pale hollows, their mouths stretched into eternal grins that split their faces too wide, too wrong. The Mahaha, tricksters, killers, spirits that wandered the north, known for laughter that could shred sanity. Their clawed hands twitched as though eager to touch flesh. The explorers stopped, their bravado gone in an instant. One raised his gun, hands trembling. But the Mahaha were already there. The tundra erupted in screams. The spirits moved too fast to follow, their laughter weaving with the howling wind. The explorers cursed and stumbled back as the first Mahaha fell upon them, its long limbs jerking in movements too fast, too crooked to be human. Anuna had always imagined them from her father's stories. Spirits with too wide smiles who tickled their victims to death. She had laughed then, thinking it silly. But the truth was worse. The Mahaha's claws dug into a man's ribs, long fingers twitching, plucking as though strumming some unseen instrument. The man shrieked, but his screams broke into a ghastly, bubbling laugh. He bucked and writhed in the snow, body convulsing in terror and mirth all at once, his eyes wild as he choked on his own laughter. Crimson frothed at his lips, and still the Mahaha grinned, its head lolling side to side as if delighted by the sound. Another explorer swung his rifle, the butt cracking against one spirit's temple. The Mahaha only laughed harder. It seized him, pinning him down, its claw tips tapping along his throat and belly like a cruel game. The man's laughter rose high and piercing, so wrong that it scraped Anuna's bones. His face purpled as he clawed at his own throat, unable to stop laughing even as his breath ran out. Anuna's stomach heaved. She pressed her mittened fist against her mouth, biting down hard on the wool to keep from sobbing. Her father's stories had been warnings, lessons whispered by firelight. But she had never been told the sound. The sound of laughter twisted into screams. The Mahaha dragged another man by his ankles across the snow, carving lines into the ground as he thrashed. They circled him like wolves, claws trailing lightly across his skin, each stroke making him jerk and convulse in spasms of hysterical, broken laughter. When one finally slashed deep, blood sprayed in an arc across the white tundra, staining the snow a violent red. The others howled their thin, sharp laughter in unison, as if mocking his death rattle. One by one, the explorers fell, twitching, shrieking, choking on their own mirth. The smell of iron filled the air, thick and hot against the frozen wind. Steam rose from their torn bodies, curling to the gray sky like smoke from a funeral pyre. And then silence. The Mahaha stood among the dead, long claws dripping, their lips pulled back in those eternal splitting smiles. They turned their gaze to Anuna. Her small body shook. She remembered sitting at her father's knee, half laughing, half shivering, when he had said, "The Mahaha will find the cruel first. But child, don't let them see you afraid." How could she not be afraid? She was 10. The blood of her people was still fresh in the snow, and now these spirits, beings older than memory, watched her as if deciding whether to play with her, too. One tilted its head, stringy black hair falling across its hollow eyes. It stepped closer, claws twitching, dripping scarlet into the snow that hissed as though the earth itself recoiled. The grin seemed to stretch wider, bones creaking with the motion. Anuna whispered the phrase again, her voice a cracked reed in the wind. Her father's words, her last shield. The Mahaha froze. Their laughter stopped mid-breath, a sound cut short and wrong. The one nearest her leaned close enough, aware that she could see her reflection warped in the slick curve of its claw. For one terrible heartbeat, Anuna thought she would join the explorers in their bloody mirth. And then, as suddenly as they came, the Mahaha slipped back into the snowdrifts. Their laughter trailed off into the distance, sharp and thin, echoing across the empty tundra like a promise. Anuna collapsed to her knees, tears burning her frozen cheeks. The silence of the tundra wrapped around her once more, but now it was changed. It was no longer the silence of peace. It was the silence after laughter. Story 2. The Tizheruk. The ship. The resolute dawn groaned against the shifting ice floes, its wooden hull straining as though it already knew the fate of the men aboard. The year was 1782, and 32 sailors had set course into waters few dared chart, seeking a faster passage through the Arctic. Their navigator, a gaunt man named Harrow, clutched his instruments like a priest with holy relics. But when fever took him in the night, sweating, delirious, and dead by dawn, their maps died with him. Now they drifted, blind in the vast white wilderness. Rations dwindled. The cold gnawed at flesh and bone, and beneath them, In the black water that stretched endlessly under ice, something stirred. The first glimpse came to a boy no older than 16. While leaning over the starboard rail to wash his hands in the icy brine, he swore he saw an eye beneath the waves, vast, lidless, and gleaming like polished stone. He stumbled back, but the others only laughed at his fear. By morning, the boy was gone. His cap floated near the stern, frozen stiff against a patch of broken ice. No scream had been heard, no splash, only silence. The men whispered of it then, the Tizheruk, the Inuit tales they had scoffed at in warm taverns back home. A serpent that swam the under-ice long as a schooner, with a neck that shot forth like a striking spear, a thief of men. That night, another vanished, then another. Each time, only the faintest disturbance, a ripple along the hull, a shudder through the planks, the creak of rope swaying though no wind stirred. The serpent was clever, patient, never taking too much, only enough to bleed their hope dry. They began to see it more often, a shadow longer than the ship itself, coiling just out of reach of the lanterns. A glistening body that broke the surface for a breath, scales black and slick as wet stone. At times, a sinuous neck rose from the water, crowned by a head with jaws that could split a mast, lined with glistening fangs. Always it slipped away again before they could even shout. The predator was studying them. By the second week, the ship was a coffin. Salt pork was gone. Fresh water froze faster than they could chip it free. Men fought like starving dogs over crumbs of hardtack. One sailor hung himself in the hold, unable to bear the hunger gnawing his belly. The others barely cut him down before the serpent returned. It took one in the dead of night, tearing him screaming from his hammock through the open deck hatch. Another was seized at dawn, his legs thrashing as the Tizheruk dragged him under so fast his cries were cut off in a choking gurgle. Blood blossomed in the water, brief as spilled wine on snow. The serpent circled them for days. Sometimes it brushed against the hull, the sound like a mountain grinding beneath the waves. Sometimes it let its great head rise just high enough for the crew to see its jagged mouth curve into something like a grin before sinking again. The men grew hollow-eyed, haunted, gnawing on leather scraps and ice chips. They stopped sleeping for fear of being the next taken. By the final days, only one man remained, Elias Crane, a sailor from Portsmouth. His cheeks had caved in, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes wild with thirst. He had watched 31 men die, swallowed, dragged screaming, broken on the icy decks. He no longer prayed. He no longer cursed. He simply waited. But waiting was worse than death. On the 9th night alone, Elias stumbled onto the deck, bareheaded in the freezing wind, and began to wail. His cries were not words, but the broken sound of a man whose soul had been ground to powder. He shouted into the dark, his voice cracking, daring the monster to come for him. His sobs echoed across the still waters. The sea answered. The Tizheruk rose from the depths, taller than the masts, water streaming from its ridged body in torrents. Its eyes were fathomless pits of ice, fixed on the lone sailor. Its maw opened, wider than the hull itself, rows of teeth gleaming like ivory daggers. Elias fell to his knees, arms spread as though welcoming it. The serpent struck. Its jaws closed around him whole, crushing the last living man aboard the Resolute Dawn in a single, terrible swallow. Then it turned on the ship itself. Its body coiled around the vessel, timbers snapping like brittle bones. The mast splintered. The hull split. With one final lurch, the Tizheruk dragged the Resolute Dawn into the black deep, timbers shrieking as water swallowed all trace of her. When the ice closed above, the sea was calm again, silent. The serpent vanished into the depths, leaving only shifting flows and endless night. The Arctic kept its secrets,